Good morning and what's up, everyone? Welcome to I guess this is a first recorded lecture for you guys. We are going to go over readings today. That's on the agenda. I'm going to do probably about half a dozen of our readings. We can't fit everybody in. I'll try to fit most, if not everyone, in the coming weeks, but this kind of catches us up for the most part with a lot of the readings that we've had so far. And these depictions in our textbooks, not only this, but the Bogra text as well, and a number of photographers, important documentary photographers whose lives and work are certainly worth knowing. So, without further ado, we'll get straight into Matt Herron. Again, before we start, putting out that great quote by Kenny Irby, who describes journalism, and especially long-form photojournalism, as the act of authentic witnessing. Again, following the theme of witness in our time. So, Matt Herron, he is a self-described radical and kind of a wild man. Howard Chapnick, as you saw in the book, he connected with Howard Chapnick to find funding for his project work in the South. And this is Howard writing about Matt in his book that you had in intro, The Truth Needs No Ally. He talks about Matt saying, well, then there's Matt Herron, a self-styled radical committed to political and social change. Herron is also a photojournalist who uses confrontational photography, that in quotes, as his primary weapon in fighting for carefully selected causes. Working his way means defining an outrage, confronting it directly, and bearing witness by putting body and camera on the line. And he detailed in this chapter, to the extent that he did, he actually put together a small staff. I'm not sure how much they were working for, if anything, but this small staff of very talented photographers who really put themselves in harm's way, in one or two cases got their ass kicked doing it. 8 photographers, just about all of whom went on to continue to do important work. And then the idea there, in doing so, he hopes to effect change by dramatizing the perceived outrage. So again, Matt follows probably, if we harken back to that discussion that we had about the concerned photographer and the continuum between advocacy on one end and activism on the other. Obviously, Matt is all in on the activism end of the continuum. He was a Quaker, he was a conscientious objector in the Korean War, and of course active in the civil rights movement. He described himself as a social documentarian, and again, he focused on the South, as you know. So, in the Southern Documentary Project, this was a project that was designed to photograph not the civil rights struggle, but the background of the people and the land that precipitated that dramatic confrontation, and he focused on telling people's stories. Okay, I'm going to share a brief video that was published on Petapixel and also Vimeo. I have the link there for you.
I wasn't in Selma for the first march, and I was in Mississippi, but I realized after the first march this was an important thing and I should go, so I went. And I joined the march and marched the whole way from Selma to Montgomery, walking backwards, mostly looking through my viewfinder and taking photographs. it was the most intense shooting of my entire life. And the singing was continuous, the spirit was amazing. It was very much a march of ordinary people. It was an extraordinary experience, but Selma was a big deal. I was in a frame of mind where my brain was completely in the visual hemisphere. My whole being was seeing stuff, and so I'm thinking I've got to find that one iconic photograph of the march. And I realized that one of the problems was the backgrounds. And I decided I needed to get the march against the sky. So I spent a day throwing myself into ditches and just shooting up against the horizon, against an empty sky, and trying to find that moment. I don't know when it was, but I was in a ditch shooting up. The marchers came along. I got 3 frames. The first frame, every leg and every arm were out of sync, and it was like garbage. Nothing worked. And the next frame, every leg and every arm and every hand was right. Again, by serendipity, there's this little airplane in the sky. And it's a Piper Cub operated by U.S. Army spotters who are looking for Klansmen hiding in the bushes. So the arms go up and the flags go up and everything sort of swoops up toward this airplane. Good photographs come from a combination of luck and hard work. And if you don't do the hard work, you're lucky to get a decent picture, but if you do the hard work, the luck may follow you, as it did quite often.
I love his descriptions there of well, as I like to point out the truth of that. Luck is best exploited. Good luck is best exploited when you're prepared for it, and that's why we spend so much time working on and especially in these curriculums and in these classes, we spend a lot of time in the technical space, really badgering students, just to be honest, about really working on the technical work and being prepared for luck when it does present itself. He also described the decisive moment, I think, very eloquently. That there was a moment before that didn't work. He shot 3 frames. Maybe the moment after, he didn't talk about that as much, but the second frame was the magical frame for him, where everything came together in kind of a moment. And he's single framing it back then. He doesn't have a motor drive, I think he could probably squeeze off 3 frames by, really cranking his hand on the rangefinder camera that he had. But again, that he really articulated really well the decisive moment and what it takes to get it. Throwing yourself in ditches. So yeah, the angle is important. Okay, so Susan Meiselas. I heard Susan Meiselas speak when she was at a NPPA short course in Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah, she's a badass, I have to admit. Anyway, I want to start off this discussion with her with yet another video. Let's see if I can get this to work. I will say that to those of you that require a trigger warning, we do have images of war and violence from her Central America work back in the 80s. So I'll go ahead and start this.
The ethics of seeing are the ethics of caring. It's not a compositional issue only to see. It's to feel, it's to connect, it's to engage in some way. Acknowledging the gift as a photographer of the encounter and the creation of a photograph is an important part for me, of being a photographer. In the early 80s, there's a civil war in Nicaragua. I met a writer who said it's really interesting what's happening there. The Somoza family had been in power for 50 years, a rebel force developing very much out of the young, of the wealthy. And it was relatively unknown. There were very few stories coming out. There was nothing, there were no visuals. Nobody knew what it looked like. Every day seemed different. Every week things were evolving. I was completely immersed in that progression, the kind of thing that people mostly watch from television and wonder what will happen next. The picture of the three men with the masks is really interesting because it's so uncharacteristic for me to do a portrait in that way. It's really performative. They're making contact bombs. Behind masks, their identity is protected from me. But they perform the photograph for me. They want people to know they exist. Whoever they imagine my photographs will be seen by. So they're kind of ahead of me in a lot of ways when they perform. So it's not surprising in some ways that that becomes a photograph that's on the cover of the New York Times. It kind of announces itself, and it announced the coming of a popular insurrection, which at that point I couldn't even have imagined. The body on the hillside, which is a very beautiful scene of a lake, is a more difficult image to look at because it was an assassination of a young man. You don't know very much about him. You only see part of his body. So the hillside is an expression of the power of the state to eliminate the opposition. It's very compelling to be part of history evolving. It kind of grabs you. So there's an ongoing engagement with history and what it means to make photographs of a particular moment in time that's kind of timely and timeless. In El Salvador, it was difficult to look head on. It was difficult to face the brutality. It was much tougher than anything I'd seen in Nicaragua, including the hillside. This photograph is made in the early 80s. That particular moment is when a bus is stopped on a major highway and the National Guard pull people off the bus and start to interrogate them. And they're looking for evidence of their alliance or their sympathies with the guerrilla movement. I'm not looking at them. I'm seeing the shadows on the wall of that search, one by one. You don't know what's going to happen to these people. Everything in time is held still for a moment. You hold your breath not knowing what they might think, what they might find, what they might do. Bearing witness is the least we can do as photographers. It's not enough. You can make a photograph, then you have to make the space for the photograph. You have to care enough about the lives within the photograph. And then you find the form that feels right. It might be in a magazine, it might be in a museum, it might be on a wall or on a page of a book. It just needs to have the opportunity for reflection and engagement that you've given it, and hopefully an audience can experience it. It's a big distance to travel from a photograph back to the lives of those who are within it, to the life of the one who's made it. It's much less about me, and it's much more, I hope, connecting through me to them.
Okay, so it's easy, to tell why I admired this photographer so much in my 20s and still do now. For one thing, I wanted to point out the way she talked about her work. And we're going to really see this again in the next video that I show you. I find her to be a master of visual rhetoric. One of the objectives of these classes in this program, is to get students really comfortable, if not downright eloquent, about talking about the work. To the extent that you talk about the work, you become visually literate. You understand the meaning of a photo and of imagery. You can talk about it, you can articulate it, you can connect your visual cortex with your speech centers and reasoning in the prefrontal cortex, and it's all connected together, and you can articulate visuals in ways that people who have less training or less exposure to this kind of thinking, the way they can't. So you have so I hold her up as not only someone who has done really, really important work, but someone worth listening to. So yeah, I think she's a badass. So I want to move into the next video that I want to talk about that she also is the star of. So we just saw the ethics of seeing just now. Creative activism, a window on the world of artists and social entrepreneurs. So this, she talks about her work a little bit. She talks about other people's work a lot. And again, she talks about activism. I don't know that the people that she features in this talk are straight up activists, but they are absolutely engaged in advocacy. So without further ado, let's get into that great video. And again, listen to how she talks and how she articulates. Again, I find her to be really eloquent when it comes to talking about the work.
I keep asking, what can photographs do? I wanted to start by looking back at some images from my memory bank, those that moved me to become a documentary photographer. First, this picture of the migrant mother, taken by Dorothea Lange during the Great Depression. Through her, we feel the weight of an unknown future. It's the particular way she looks away that draws us in. Or this photograph by Elliot Erwitt, without which we might not remember the extreme segregation in the American South or see the everyday silence of racism at work. Photographs like this fueled the civil rights movement 50 years ago, and yet ongoing. When Americans at home saw this image, they couldn't believe that the American military could be so inhumane. But when Vietnamese photographer Nick Ut took this picture of the Napalm Girl, he had no idea that that single image would contribute so much to stopping the war in Vietnam, nearly 40 years ago. Stuart Franklin's image of a single man standing before the tanks in Tiananmen Square in 1989 was so potent that it is still censored in China today. Of course, we remember these images. They're powerful, they were timely, and are now timeless. They're iconic. Photographs call up a time, a place, a context, and compress moments of our collective history into a single frame. When I made this photograph, known now as the Molotov Man in Nicaragua, the protagonists of history were dreaming revolution. The Somoza dictatorship was overthrown the next day, 35 years ago. But as photographers, we don't actually go out to take iconic images. In 1980, I made this image of the Mano Blanca in El Salvador. It registers the white hand left by the death squads on the door of a campesino leader who had just been killed. That signature spread more fear than the killing itself. The photograph continues to have an ongoing life and act as testimony. Staying in Central America for more than a decade, I wanted to immerse and capture the intimate, to connect a distant audience, as well as impact the lives within the frame. It takes time to build in-depth relationships and trust across a cultural divide. For an invested photographer, this is our patient capital. Today, I wonder if this couple might make this image of themselves. Photographers stand for and stand with those who cannot always speak for themselves. Two boys with their thumbs tied together, shot and dumped on a street corner. Photographs perform a claim, though it often takes decades to hold anyone accountable for the abuses they document. The interrogation of bus passengers, a daily event at a military checkpoint on the main highway. I, like other photographers, am driven by a necessity to bear witness. Without knowing what I will find, where the commitment will lead, how it might change me, or how history will unfold. Only when 180,000 Kurds fled northern Iraq into Turkey did we hear about the genocide of Saddam Hussein's Anfal campaign. 4,000 Kurdish villages were systematically destroyed. I crossed the border of Iran and went into Kurdistan to document what the refugees had left behind. This is one of the remaining homes I saw in 1991. A photograph can reveal powerful evidence, such as this scar from a bullet in the back of Timur, the only eyewitness to survive a village massacre when he was 12 years old. 18 years later, my photographs in Timur testified in the trial that indicted Saddam Hussein. A complex visual narrative contained in a frame suspends and freezes a fleeting story. The one static element here is a sculpture. Our world collapsed around it. When I made this picture in Liberty Plaza on September 11th, 2001, Americans could not understand what had happened. No one knew it would also be the most photographed day in history and shape us all for decades to come. In the wake of 9/11, photography was propelled into a digital age that would launch the democracy of a medium with more cameras, phones, and eyes than we could ever imagine. That shift would also unleash the participation of millions of disparate global voices and create a perpetual viral exchange. We are now overstimulated and overwhelmed with multi-source content. We are linked, but we live in distinctly separate worlds, with algorithms dictating what we see. We are at risk of greater fragmentation, with images further decontextualized. In this oversaturated digital world, what can photographs do now? This is the environment we are all navigating today. Do you remember this picture of the Rana Plaza collapse, factory collapse in Dhaka, nearly 2 years ago? Two workers embraced just at the moment of their death. It was made by Taslima Akhter, a young photographer from Bangladesh. It was the most viewed image across time.com. It sparked international outrage. But how many of us in the global community ask, what's happening now? Long after that photograph was on our front page and circulated online, Taslima is still there, documenting the lives of workers, advocating for labor protections and systemic change. Where does the work of the photographer end and the role of citizens begin? Taslima and other emerging photographers we support believe in using different visual strategies to frame and create frameworks to expose and engage. This is the desk in an interrogation room in Libya. It's a quiet image. At first glance, you might think it banal. But Edmund Clark is documenting the only visible evidence of an invisible war on terror, compelling us to question what else we don't see and should know about. Peter de Campo looks at the often painful truth of well-intentioned foreign aid and its unexpected consequences. Here he focuses on concrete slabs intended to be the base for latrines left unused in northern Ghana. His pictures do not illustrate, they interrogate. To counter the Palestinian stereotype, Tanya Hajoka follows Hayat and Nabila, who do yoga on the outskirts of Bethlehem. She believes her images can cut through the flood of pictures of destruction and conflict to portray the positive, their perseverance under occupation. #Disturb is a growing circle of photographers who mobilize. They take to the streets and paste their images on walls. They return to a physical encounter, not fully trusting viral dispersion alone. They call upon the public to respond and act upon the issues they care passionately about. How can technology intensify our focus to feel and impact the world beyond ourselves? The challenge is to sustain critical, independent, intelligent eyes on the world. Despite the disruption of our mass media, the proliferation of imagery, and our selfie culture, documentary photographers are still committed and determined to bear witness. They still believe in what photographs can do, and so do I. Thank you.
Okay, then, moving on, we're going to talk about Bill Owens. So Bill Owens set his sights not on far-off lands or war, but he wanted to photograph what was close to home. So he focused on suburbia. As you saw in the reading, he went from the Peace Corps to college. So he went from a volunteer and kind of a worldly-oriented perspective and a volunteerism perspective to college. That certainly informed, I think, his takes on the lessons from college, and then went on to get a job at a small local newspaper in Livermore, California. So again, Livermore is kind of a what you would consider an edge city. It's a suburban environment. And he became interested, especially with that Peace Corps background, he became very interested in materialism. He turned his, I think probably within the spirit of our earlier assignment where the photographers in this class were challenged to go out into the the areas within 2 miles of your houses or where you were. Look for a place, look for something positive going on within 2 miles of your back door. Well, he wanted to photograph his own community and tell those stories, and I think kind of make some statements on the culture and the sets of values that were operating within those communities, and the sets of values that held people together and people basically sort of agreed on. So back the kind of thing that we could do back when we had newspapers, we would do it differently today, I think, but he published a classified ad. So, today maybe it would be in Craigslist, or maybe it would be a Twitter post. But, he published a classified ad that just said, hey, I'm doing this documentary on Livermore. Can you call me? And he put his phone number out there in the newspaper. I wonder if that would happen today. So he talks about serendipity, and again, this gets back to the theme, consistent theme I'm noticing, of serendipity playing a very important role in your photographs, but you have to be prepared for it. You have to be there, fully trained, and take advantage of luck when it shows up in front of your lens. So over and over again, we're seeing people, very homogeneous population, certainly in suburbia, people integrated and surrounded by stuff. Oh my God, there's a lot of stuff in there. Anyway, so he really talks about editing a lot. As he says, I'm one of those photographers who gets really upset when people repeat their images. I never should have seen the same face twice, never show the same home twice. I want every image to stand on its own. So probably even worse than I am in terms of being the redundancy police. He's probably like next level. Very, very tight editor and makes very judicious decisions about what he shows. A Tupperware party. Went up to a second-story window before the age of drones and just got a really good overall. Again, he's really all about lensing and every just being very, very purposeful. Every image, every angle, every frame being absolutely purposeful. I was not a stranger in a strange land. This was my community. So, I just had this idea. I'm going to push it out in an assignment, just like a one paragraph thing. I'd like you to share your thoughts. Again, I'm just going to push this out as a written quiz. You'll probably get, as long as you really give a good answer, you'll definitely get points for it. Just spend about a paragraph, maybe two. Is it possible to do a story like this today? If you were to try, how would you do it? How hard is it to do a story on your own community? So I'd like to hear you kind of think about these questions and hear your thoughts about these questions in a brief written response to a quiz, and I'm going to push out immediately after I post this video. Again, very brief, 1-2 paragraphs at the most. If you want to go longer, that's fine. You definitely get the points. And also think about including this discussion or all these discussions actually, in your journals. Okay, then, moving on to Jill Freedman and her work in Resurrection City. Okay, so she was born during the Second World War, during the Holocaust. She has a very strong, again, kind of like Matt Herron, totally out there, totally all the way at the activism end of the continuum between activism and advocacy. She is a full-on 110% activist. She was galvanized into action when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and she joined the Poor People's March on Washington in 1968. Quotes from the chapter: "When they killed Martin Luther King, I was so enraged. I just quit and joined the Poor People's Campaign. We went through a different town each day, slept in people's homes and churches, chemical toilets with no chemicals, bologna sandwiches on white bread every day. We marched through different cities and towns for a week and then lived in the mud next to the reflecting pool between the Abraham Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. They called the monument the Klansman because at night there was this pointed head and the red eyes from the red beacons at the top. And it totally does look like that. It looks like a monster at night, especially when it's not lit. She says, "We're storytellers, really. I consider myself a documentarian. The sense that I try to show, of course, is from my point of view always. Otherwise, what am I, a machine? I try to be sure what's going on. I try to show what's going on. I try to show as much as possible, keep myself out of the focus. I hate when photographers act like big stars. I get to identify deeply with the subjects. I've always felt like an actress. You live in your role, you immerse yourself in your role, and that's what I do with photography. I absorb it. I just become part of it. I'm not thinking of anything else." I'm going to read another quote from her chapter that I think is particularly powerful. It's a great honor and a privilege to be able to enter people's lives. It's very humbling. The most important thing which sets photography I like against most of which I hate is respect. You don't get anything decent unless you have the respect. When you're sincere, then people will work with you. If you put in enough time, you can be invisible. That's absolutely true. It used to amaze me when what people would do in front of me and what people would say, to the point where sometimes I would say, "Remember, I'm a reporter. Do you really want to say that?" Documentary is pure form. Certainly the photography turned me on, those moments, catching the moments, but unless it has the heart, to me, it's nothing. Okay, so we're going to move into another of her videos.
I knew I had to shoot the Poor People's Campaign when they murdered Martin Luther King Jr. I had to see what was happening, to record it and be part of it. I felt so bad. Besides, it sounded too good to miss. So I went and had one of the times of my life, and this is my trip. And I never realized how much had become a part of me until I was writing this and saying we and us and feeling homesick, which is what Resurrection City was all about. Of course, it was old stuff from the start. Another nonviolent demonstration. Another march on Washington. Another army camping, calling on a government that acts like the telephone company. Even poverty is ancient history. Always have been poor people, still are, always will be.
We've got some difficult days ahead.
Because governments are run by ambitious men and no imagination, whose priorities are so twisted that they burn food while people starve. And we let them.
A long life, longevity.
So that history doesn't change much with the names.
I'm not concerned about that now.
Nothing protects the innocent,
And he's allowed me to go.
and no news is new.
And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anything. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Okay then. Next in the lineup, and you read something from Time magazine, a link on Time about Sara, Naomi Lewkowicz. She is a friend of mine. We were at the first Image Deconstructed workshop together. And I think she's a badass. She's still freelancing out of New York City. She's spoken to my classes before, and she is the former NPPA Student Photographer of the Year. When she was a graduate student at OU, she did this story that I'm about to show you. Her passion is telling the stories about domestic assault victims, inspired by the work of Donna Ferrato, in both this book and also the Bogri book on activism. So she documented this couple, got pretty profound access. She noticed along the way this guy's kind of controlling behavior, his body language, and occasional acts of aggression. It got really bad one night when she had one really bad argument after they were at a bar. She hands her cell phone to her cousin, who was also in the house, and her cousin called the police. And he's still in prison, as far as I know. I should actually check to see what his current status is, but I'm pretty sure he's still in prison.
In the beginning, everything was so perfect. It was like fun for me, you know, just like a new car would be fun to go really fast in. But you never think that you're going to crash. I was actually married when we met, and I found out that my husband at the time was cheating on me, and ever since then we started dating. Having somebody there that was like sweet and like always telling you you're beautiful and like wanted to do stuff, like always talked about having a family and like missing his daughters, and that was like a big factor in what made us start dating. I was like, I really thought that he was like seriously ready to be like a man and take care of a family and have a family life with me. A lot of warning signs that I noticed with Shane were pushing people out of my life, kind of isolating me, moving me out of town. He would say things like, I love you so much and I'll love you more than anybody else will love you, to kind of get in my head like, wow, maybe he will. Maybe he is the only person that will love me that way. At the time that I met him, he was like very bad into drugs, and my mom passed away when I was 8. She used a lot of pills all the time. She was always messed up, and I mean, like, what if someone would have been there for my mom? I mean, that was like my second chance, you know, like, wow, I couldn't do it for my mom, so maybe I can do it for you. I was always really like protective, like I wouldn't let him be alone with Kaden. Like if Kaden had done something wrong and he like wanted to like talk to him or something, because like I knew that he had so many disorders. I guess I just didn't know how serious those disorders were. I couldn't change him. And then like I almost felt guilty if I left. The incident at the bar, when he was singing a song and another female at the bar came up and started dancing. I don't know, I was just really angry at the whole situation, so I just like stormed off the bar store and just like shoved her out of the way, and I just walked out of the door.
Lincoln to 911, where's your emergency?
Yeah, I need a cop to 507 Goodwin. There's somebody out of control, drunk
care what happened to me as long as she was just okay and she didn't see anything. And I just wanted to comfort her, and he wouldn't even let me get to her. And that was the only thing that I cared about. And I'm going to move on with my life and just hope that he gets exactly what he deserves. I hope that he goes to jail and stays there for a long time, because he's a monster to me, and I think that's where he deserves to be. I'm going to Alaska, see my husband, and we're going to try to work through our problems. I love seeing I care about him. Like, I couldn't imagine spending forever with anybody else. We started dating when we were 14, so we have like a lot of history together. Some of it's not always pleasant either, so those things kind of worry me. We have our moments, but we're trying to make it work. Sometimes we have fights about the past, but it hasn't been as difficult as my past relationship, but we still have times when we disagree on things. It's not really so much about just the incident that happened. It's more like the long-term effect of, like, how did I not see that? Like, how could I be so stupid? How did I let this happen to my family? The feeling never really goes away. Even when you're, like, super happy, and, like, you're like, oh, this is so exciting, and in the back of your head, you're like, oh, wait, no, this feeling really does suck. So, like, I just kind of have to, like, push it down a lot and suppress it. I'm kind of bummed because Zane has to leave for 2 weeks. He's going to an SIT school, which is like military SWAT. It's kind of boring in Alaska when the only person that you have here is leaving. I think that Zane and I will eventually work past all of our problems and be fine. I do have like a lot of hope for our relationship.
So I put another video, it's available, it's online on Canvas if you want to. It's like a 40-minute video, is way too long for this class, but if you're interested in the controversy that ensued after she published this story, again, as we've talked about, often there is kind of an ethical mandate for her, or for any photographer, when you see violence happening, somehow to step in. I would certainly caution anybody about stepping into a situation like that, especially if it's a domestic argument. I just don't think it's wise. What she did do is photograph it. She documented it. She gave her cell phone to the cousin who called the cops. So she did play an intervening role. But she had this controversy after the story was published. And as we talked about, you can do all the right things and still face a lot of criticism. So again, that's something else that you can kind of write about in your journals, your thoughts about that. Just another suggestion. Okay, this is it for me. We covered a lot of material here. I'm going to now stop this video and fiddle with the production a bit because I had to stop and start it a couple of times. Hope to get this pushed out by noon. See what I can do. I hope to see you on Thursday where we do a live critique on your photo columns. So, bye-bye.